It's another beautiful morning where we bring to you, the newspaper review from our Nigerian newspaper. The Dailies is the program, and I'm Sada Elisha, and Rachel Tansley is my host. Good morning, Rachel.
Morning,
how you doing?
I'm fine.
All right. We're live on Facebook and also on YouTube. Do well to drop your comment or your contribution on our Facebook or YouTube, channel, and then also we'll open the phone lines later on, so you can also, call in and air your views, as we have a lot of stories, especially with Binani, approaching the court, saying that INEC has no power to actually void her, her election as the governor-elect of Adamawa State. So do keep tight as we take you down whatever is happening on the papers this morning. And I'll be starting with the Leadership newspaper. Defend Nigeria at all costs, COAS charges troops. You can find that story on page 15 of the Leadership newspaper. NLC vows to flush out sponsors from Labour Party. You can find that on page 23. And we have passengers trek to catch flight at Union Ground airports. Air passengers were yesterday stranded for several hours following the disruption of activities at the National Airport as aviation workers embark on day one of their scheduled two-day warning strike. Leadership reports that activities at the Nnamdi Azikiwe International Airport were disrupted by the aviation union strike as passengers had to walk extra mile in order to catch up with their flight. Also, business activities around the Lagos airport were paralyzed for hours yesterday as aviation workers drowned two in a warning strike. You can continue to read that story on the front page and also page 8 of the Leadership newspaper. Hope rises for Nigerian children as federal government okays Oxford malaria vaccine. You can find that story on page 8, and I hope that will open door for us to actually, deal with this issue of malaria that has been killing a lot of people. The big story: Adamawa governorship, INEC has no power to void my declaration, Binani tells court. With the rider PDP governors demand end to electoral lamborghini. And then we have commission suspend REC Hudu Yunusa Ari for Inglorious Act to decide on poll today. PDP supporters protest in Yola. You can read that story on the front page and also on page 4. And let me just take you down a little of what's happening on that. The Independent National Electoral Commission on Monday ordered the REC Commissioner for Adamawa State, Udu Yunusa Ari, to stay away from the Commission State Office. INEC's action was premised on Yunusa's Ari declaration of the All Progressive Congress governorship candidate Aisha, popularly known as Binani, as the governor-elect in Saturday's supplementary election. And then we have here that but Binani at the Federal High Court in Abuja on Monday filed a suit seeking an order to prevent INEC and its agent from taking any further step toward the declaration of the winner of the election pending the determination of her court case. Yunusa Ari had announced Binani as the winner of the supplementary poll while the collation of the result was underway, causing confusion in the state and drawing consternation across the country. Before the declaration, Binani was trailing behind Governor Adamu Fitiri of the PDP, who had established a margin of lead of 31,249 votes. And according to here, we have that Fitiri had actually scored 421,524 votes ahead of Binani, who got 390,275. So if you're interested in that story, do grab the Leadership and read more detail of that story. Stop killings in southern Kaduna, Benue, Taraba now. You want to know who said that? Do well to grab the paper and read more detail of that story on page 15. And from Human Angle here, we have Ogun woman sells 18-month-old baby to offset bank loan. This is really a sad one. You can read more of that inside the paper. 2.4 billion naira debt. AMCON takes over asset of Glino, Nigeria. You can read that story on page 20. And we have a cross-section over here in Abuja and also in Lagos, where we can see the Labour talking about the NLC, so you can do well to actually find more detail of that story, and that's all on the leadership newspaper.
On the Matrix newspaper, federal government appeals to aviation workers to call off strike. Nigeria's oil export drop as ExxonMobil declares force majeure on crude oil lifting. CBN Naira redesign cost microfinance banks customers hardship, coming from NMB. You can find the details on page 18. And on Champions League, Ancelotti returns to Stamford to expose Chelsea's downfall. Aisha Binani goes to court, seeks judicial confirmation as winner of Adamawa Guba poll. The rider following that INEC lacks power to declare collation of results null and void, coming from Senator Abo. You can find the details inside the paper on page 4. The big story on the Matrix newspaper, Labour Party crisis. Amid NLC's backing, court maintains order against Abure. Why court refused to vacate order retraining Abure, NLC moves against plot to throw the Labour Party into chaos. The details can be found on page 2. UBA Group declares 614 billion profit, 47.5% growth in first quarter of 2023. How Nigeria spent 96% of revenue on debt servicing in 2022, coming from the World Bank. Rice processors, farmers count losses as foreign rice return to market. The details can be found inside the paper on page 4. At the downside of the paper, how Atiku Obi Kwankwaso handed away presidential victory to Tinubu, coming from Fashola. You can read the details on page 9. We have a picture story. Makinde led G5 members on solidarity visit. Oyo State Governor Sheyi Makinde paid solidarity visit to Adamawa State Governor Amadu Fintiri at Yola yesterday. And that's all the news on the Matrix newspaper.
On the Daily Times newspaper, the big story, Aviation Union shut airports crippled activities nationwide with the rider. Minister pleads for understanding. You can start reading on the front page and continue to read more inside the paper. Coming from Buhari, we have provided incoming government tools to guide Nigerians' energy future. You can read more of that story on the front page and also on page 2. We have protests in Yola as PDP accuses Adamawa Rec of acting INEC chairman script. Well, you want to know more if that is true or what he has to say about that, read it inside the paper. And we have NG Cares, federal government releases 45.3 billion naira reimbursement to states and FCT. You can find more of that story on page 16. Forgery of Supreme Court judgment. Police withdraw amended charges against Apga chieftains. You can find that story on page 3. Guinea citizenship. Speak up now, POSN tells Tinubu. You can find that story on page 13. We had that story over the weekend where we heard that the president-elect have dual citizenship, so we want to know what the Constitution has to say if he has the legal right to still be the president. So if you're interested in that story, you can read more of that on page 13. We still have the, talking about the protests over there at the Aviation Union for their day one strike. Warning strike, which is supposed to be for Monday and Tuesday. We have the labor, talking about the labor over there. So you can catch the paper and read more detail of any story that is of interest to you.
On the Guardian newspaper, 40% of failed transactions unresolved as e-payments hit 49.4 trillion naira. New wave of kidnapping amid botched naira redesign policy. You can find this analysis on page 4 of the Guardian newspaper. NAFDAC grants provisional approval for first malaria vaccine in Nigeria. Fresh oil output concern as ExxonMobil declares force majeure. Chinese brands dominate Nigeria's mobile phone market. You can find the business details on page 15. Aviation workers reject federal government plea disrupt flight operations over CEO's welfare. And you can find the details on page 3. At the downside of the paper, in Adamawa, despite REC suspension, PDP insists on protest till poll concludes. The details can be found on page 8, and that's all the news on the Guardian newspaper.
On Nigerian News Direct, 2.4 billion naira debt, AMCON takes over asset of Glino Nigeria Limited. Sanwo-Olu reiterates Lagos partnership with Norway government and companies. And on energy sustainability, producing energy remains priority coming from the NNPCL. The big story, which is still on Adamawa Guba poll, PDP governors foam over controversial declaration, demand authentic winner. With the writer say odd declaration, lowest point of 2023 general election, national disgrace. Without corruption, extremely partisan officials coming from the governors to INEC. As INEC suspend REC indefinitely, you can find more detail of that story on page 3. We have some few cross section of some pictures, so you can do well to grab the Nigerian News Direct and read detail of any story that is of interest to you.
On New National Star, troops foil attack on Zamfara Council headquarters. Coming from Buhari, federal government raked in 203 billion naira through sale of 161 marginal oil licenses. The details can be found on page 2. Federal government approves use of R21 malaria vaccine. Women Affairs Minister laments diminishing representation of women in the National Assembly. The details can be found on page 7, and the question is, what have you done to make sure that more women are joining you in the National Assembly? And I'm throwing this out to the few that are in the National Assembly. What have you done to make sure that more women have joined you in the National Assembly? And you can find the details on page 7. Adamawa governorship tussle. INEC hammer falls on Reg Hudu Ari. Fair grip other state regs as commission extends investigation. PDP kick says suspension not enough, reg playing INEC script. Labour Party crisis linger on as court rebuffs effort to reinstate Abure. Cross River Ebonyi Zamfara top list as cholera kills 79 in 3 months. The details can be found on page 3. Aviation industry witnesses business gloom as workers' strike continues. JAM extends 2023 direct entry registration. The details can be found on page 23. Army generals battle for power in Sudan. Crisis in Warri Kingdom as Olu Ogiame installs new Olobosore. You can find the details on page 10. And that's all the news on National Star.
On the Punch newspaper, with a big story, fuel subsidy, federal government begins 40% pay raise for workers April ending. With the rider, government will settle January-March arrears later, says the Labour Ministry. Increased transport and housing allowance also, TUC tells the federal government, and I think I love to read detail of that. Barring any last-minute change of plan, the federal government will begin payment of the planned increase in civil servants' pay by the end of this month, which is April. The Punch can report the President, Major General Muhammadu Buhari, retired, is expected to give his final asset for disbursement any moment from now. If the proposal sails through, it means that the increase will be coming about 2 months to the June date proposed for the removal of petrol subsidy. Officials of the federal government told the Punch exclusively that the fresh pay increase, tagged consequential allowance, will lead to a 40% raise in the current pay of government workers. Speaking exclusively with the Punch, the Director of Press and Public Relations, Ministry of Labour and Employment, Olajide, revealed that the federal government might begin payment of the 40% pay raise by the end of April this year, adding that the 3-month arrears of the January, February and March will be paid at a later date. However, she said she could not confirm if the proposal by the government committee started with the tax had been finally approved by the president. He said consequential allowance salaries will be increased by 40% of civil servants from level 1 to level 17. And I think this is the right step in the right direction. You could remember when we had the issue of fuel scarcity, and then a lot of things that are happening, inflation rate, especially when it kept increasing. We had where the Minister of Labor and Employment said that it's very important and paramount that they increase the salaries of workers. Of course, we had the promises starting first with the teachers, where it was in just, I think, about Lagos State, where he promised teachers to increase their salary. But then we saw where the Minister of Labor said that possibilities are they need to increase the salary. Another question has been that even when it was being increased the minimum wage to 30,000 naira, how many states have implemented that? And now we're seeing that from level 1 to level 17, the federal government is hoping to increase the salary of civil servants. And I hope that increasing the salary does not just end at the federal level. We should go down to the local government, state level, up to the federal level, increasing the salary of our civil servants, because it's very important. They are servants of the government, so they should eat from where they actually sweat. Now, the question right now is, we are not even sure if the president has approved it now. That is a concern already as it is. But I'm happy that they said maybe because of the removal of the fuel subsidy. Yesterday we saw that there's about a loan that was given to us by the World Bank of about $800 million, where they say about 50 million vulnerable Nigerians will benefit. And I asked, what is this? How are we measuring?
The
statistics of those 50 million vulnerable Nigerians. I remember there was a time that 4,000 naira was being given to few individuals. Maybe where I was able to know was because I knew few people, or I think about just 2 people who actually, got that money. I think earlier this year too, we saw about 5,000 naira too will be given to some Nigerians. Right now we're seeing, I think, 1 point something million Nigerians will be receiving that. Thank you, Rachel. And now we're seeing that another 50 million vulnerable Nigerians in the population of over 200 million Nigerians. Now I begin to ask, how did we come across that? But regardless of that, if you recall yesterday, I said, I just hope that you don't keep giving people fish. You teach them how to fish. It's important. Farmers are already complaining. We are seeing that foreign rice is beginning to gain access into the market. I asked, how did foreign rice come in? How did our custom officers let that happen? Because I remember where the president, when we're launching the rice pyramid, we're proud and saying that we're one of the, when talking about producing of rice in Africa, we're one of those, top rice producers. So how comes foreign rice is getting access into our market? That is to show that farmers will be losing out at the end of the day. The time when we're crying inflation, we've been, I think I can't count how many times, Rachel, you and I keep saying the importance of us consuming what we're producing. That is the only way we can actually cross this inflation fine at the end of the day. Let's not talk about the psychological trauma Nigerians have to go through. Some people are depressed as it is right now because you don't know where your next meal is coming from. So I'm hoping that as we are waiting for the approval of the president on this 40% raise of salary, which is supposed to implement from the end of this month, and then the arrears for January to March will be following up. I just hope, it's truly my desire, Rachel, because if you look at the minimum wage, how many parents can send their kids to a good school? Because it's not even supposed to be about a good school. It's supposed to be that free education for everybody. But we're still growing, making it free, even though there are few states where we have free education in our public sectors. But then if you're talking about that, what is the quality of the education given to them? Because some of the standard is really going down, even in some of our private schools. So my desire right now is, as we wait for the approval of the president on this raise, we should make sure that for other states that were unable to actually make it to that minimum wage, let us see what we can do to actually help them. And I hope that the governors of those states, when they are being given out all of this, pay that is being given to help them, I just hope that they will use it properly. Let us not see some unnecessary projects coming up where we have workers, actually living in poverty. So I hope to see that coming up.
So to be honest, anytime I hear that the government is trying to review payment, income, salaries for workers, trying to increase it, I don't get excited. The reason is because the real thing that is eating up our economy is inflation. And that's what has been tempering with our standard of living. What is the point of increasing the income, the salary of workers, and we still have the prices of goods hiking and going high and high? what I could purchase with 30,000 last year, I can't with 50,000 this year. So it means even if I was earning 30,000 last year, if you increase my income to 50,000, I will still be living at the level of 30,000 or less. My standard of living will not increase because goods and services, there is inflation, and I might not even be able to afford certain things. So anytime I hear about this review, salary review and all of that from the federal government, I'm not excited because more pay is not the problem in Nigeria. It's inflation. It's inflation that is eating us up. It's inflation that is killing. It's our naira devaluing every single day, every month. Weeks come and go, and our naira just keeps losing its value. It's everything. Is the fuel scarcity. It's the things that are eating up our economy that is the problem, not the income. Because you can't go to the market with 1,000 naira and come out with anything reasonable. There were times we could buy sugar for 250. I don't even want to go to a measure of sugar. I don't even want to go back to when it wasn't 250.
True.
And now you're buying a measure of sugar over 1,000.
1,000 plus.
So do we sit down and say that the real problem is increasing income or fighting what is affecting the standard of living? I just hope that we do the right thing as a country, because we've been increasing salaries. This is not the first time the government have reviewed incomes of civil servants and have increased it, but it hasn't stopped the hardship. So it automatically tells us that that is not the solution, that is not a problem. It's only temporary. I might be happy that I'm having a 30% increase, but guess what? Inflation is flying, is at 21%. And I don't know from now till next year whether to be 25 or 30.
Rachel, you don't even have to go next year, the middle of this year. Let's go meet this year. What will be the inflation?
It at 30. So you tell me, was there really an increase in my salary, or was I just giving more money to be able to just go and buy more expensive things in the market?
It's really sad.
It doesn't improve my standard of living. So I'm just looking forward to a government that does the right work. Direct your energy to do. I keep saying it. We have everything it takes. The government have the resources, the intelligence. They know what is needed to be done. And not to say that the effort of increasing salary is wasted. No. But that is not the solution to the problem of our economy. It is not. Because we're still fighting inflation every day. And that is what is threatening our livelihood, our standard of living. And that is what is bringing hardship on people. Let our naira stop devaluing. Let inflation stop. And people will not even care whether their income has been reviewed, because their standard of living has gone high and they can afford their basic needs.
You know, Rachel, I was reading a book and it says that if you're going to sum up your annual pay and then it's less than 300,000, you are poor. Rachel, I leave it at that point. Let's continue with the Punch newspaper. Striking aviation workers reject government plea, threatening total shutdown. You can see a cross-section of the, the various, protests over there at the various airports in Abuja and also in Lagos. $2.8 billion gas pipeline progressing to power 3,600 megawatts plants coming from the federal government. We have the picture of the Ogun woman who sold her 18-month-old baby to repay a loan. Two parties challenge Makandi's election tribunal order service on Sanwo-Olu. You can find that story on page 12, and that's all on the Punch newspaper.
On New Telegraph, cash crisis. POS deals rise 39.17% to 323.17 billion naira in the first quarter of 2023. Energy cost report projects sustained inflation in Nigeria. You can find the details on page 5. Coming from Buhari, Nigeria made 200 billion naira, $7 million from issuance of PPLS. Tribunal throws out petition against Kalu's victory. NLC to workers arrest importers plotting to destroy Labour Party. JAM extends 2023 direct entry registration by 1 week. The big story on New Telegraph, Nigeria's revenue threatens as ESCOM unit declares force majeure. Firm amongst country's largest oil producers crisis being resolved coming from the management, we're not exiting Nigeria, rather deepening our operations coming from Shell. You can find the details on page 3 and 7. Unions ground activities at Lagos Airport. Sirika appeals to aviation workers to end strike. Northern Christian elders, Buhari shouldn't leave killings as parting gifts. Coming from the IGP, CMR certificate no longer valid as digital vehicle registration process begins. EU ambassador assaulted in Sudanese violence as 100 killed, hospitals shelled. You can find the details on page 5. And on supplementary polls, INEC suspends Adamawa Rec, wants him to stay away from Commission's office until further notice. Direct Administrative Secretary to take full charge. Weed out partisans, corrupt officials, PDP governor tells INEC. You can read the detail on page 4 and 8. At the downside of the paper, NAFDAC approves R21 malaria vaccine for children. You can find the details on page 3. And that's all the news on New Telegraph.
All right, before we continue with the newspaper review, let's take this time out so we can actually let you through the stories. A lot is happening. We still have the back and forth on the supplementary election in Adamawa State. We have northern elders also telling the president to please do something about the killings we're having, especially in the northern part of the country. And also we have seen that the government is hoping to actually, increase the pay of civil servants to 40%. So we want to know, what does that mean for the economy of Nigeria at a time where we're also fighting inflation? These and many other stories are what we have been looking at on the papers this morning. So when we come back from the break, we will open the phone line so we can also hear your views on this story. Please do not go anywhere. We'll be right back. Thanks for staying tuned. It's still the Dailies on your winning station, and we've been looking at various stories on our papers this morning. We've seen that we still have the back and forth, especially the suspension of the REC officer for Adamawa State, and also we have seen that the APC candidate, which is Binani, is actually approaching the court saying that INEC has no right to void her election as the governor-elect. We've also seen that looking at the issue of the first subsidy removal, which is hopefully to be in June, we have a pay raise for civil servant, which is about 40%. So these and many other stories are on the paper. We've also have strike from the aviation workers, which they started yesterday, and we've seen that there have been a lot of chaos in Abuja and also the Lagos airport. So you can do well, grab the paper, read more detail of the story. At this moment, our phone numbers are open. They are displayed on your screen. Do well to call us. Please do remember to turn down the volume of your TV set. Also use civil language, and also you have just 30 seconds as all the callers are queuing up to also air their views on the stories. I still have Rachel with me in the studio. Thank you, Rachel.
You're welcome.
All right, let's continue with a paper review. Looking at the first newspaper. On the 10th Senate presidency, according to the Southeast preference over South-South, be injustice coming from Afebu. And we have one from Adamawa, INEC has left you without any legacy, CNPP tells Buhari. Tinubu Micromax team more than Buhari coming from Fashoda. You can read more of that story inside the paper. Many killed, houses burned in Plateau Village, and I was saying that, so we hope something is done. We have Benue, we have Adamawa, we have Kaduna, we have Plateau State, and these are just few that made it to the paper. So we are hoping that something will be done, just like we're saying, for the governors that will be stepping down, you need to leave a good legacy. And for the president, it's something that he needs to put his cabinet members together, that whether you are presently in the country or not, you have to do something, because your number one responsibility, as far as Nigerians are concerned, is to protect lives and to protect property. So when you fail in those two, then your scorecard, Nigerians will have
low.
nothing to. Of course, it will be low, so we hope something will be done about that. The big story. Conclude Adamawa Guba poll now. PDP governors charge INEC. As protests by the PDP APC supporters broke state, governors demand review of Rex appointment, process persecution of Hudu and others. Commission suspend airing Rec indefinitely, bars him from office. INEC hold emergency meeting on Adamawa election debrief today, so you can find more details inside the paper. NLC officials storm LP Secretariat in solidarity with Abure as court refuses to lift suspension order on LP National Chairman and others. Again, showing Cardi Box comment on 2023 election as fake. You can find more of that story inside the paper. Greek lock as aviation workers block access route to Lagos Airport. And we have mob attack victim buried as Ondo police arrest 7. You can find more detail of the story inside the paper, and that's all on First News.
On Nigerian Tribune, passengers stranded as aviation unions begin strike. Ground airport movement strike unnecessary coming from the government, and you can find the details on page 2. NLC officials visit Labour Party Secretariat, bag Abure-led ESCO. Federal government approves Oxford malaria vaccine for use in Nigeria. Vaccine indicated for prevention of clinical malaria in children from 5 to 36 months. You can start with the details on the front page and continue on page 2. And the big story on Nigerian Tribune, more knocks for Adamawa Rec as Binani goes to court. The rider following that, INEC suspends him. PDP governor called his action show of shame. Once appointment of Rex reviewed. Makinde visits Fintiri, describes Rex action unimaginable. Protesters in Yola want election result released. Electoral body to meet today. You can find the details on page 4 and 5. Jungle Justice, police parade suspected killers of driver in Ondo. APN challenge Makinde's victory, file petition at tribunal. Woman sells 18-month-old baby for 600,000 to offset loan in Ogun. The details can be found on page 15. And at the Jakarta Kaduna Kano gas pipeline, 43% ready. This is coming from Buhari. You can start with the story on the front page and continue inside the paper on page 6. And that's all the news on Nigerian Tribune.
On Daily Sun newspaper, Apga crisis, police withdraw amended charge against Ojukwu, Justice Odidi secretary. You can find that story on page 26. The big story, aviation strike, passengers stranded, airlines suffer losses. Federal government begs union to cut off strike. You can find that story on page 2. Kidnapper buries 3-year-old boy alive after collecting ransom in Castina. With the rider, gunmen kill community leader in Kaduna, abduct 8 in Benue. Kidnappers kill victim, 8 injure 3. Policemen in Rivers, detailed on page 4 and 5. Nigeria spent 96.3% of 2022 revenue on debt servicing, and we can find more of that story on page 25 coming from the World Bank. I hope that we get wise, that we don't spend our entire revenue on paying debt, but then we have to create wealth at the end of the day. That's why we keep talking about having a safe environment where investors can invest in the economy, looking at consuming what we have, also looking at how we can process this thing and, export it to other countries. I mean, we're talking about food production, we have it in excess, so I hope the government will look into that. It's sad that out of 100%, you've spent about 96.3% of your revenue paying up debt, and that is why we saw where people were coming up with some suggestion on maybe let's increase our tax instead of borrowing. But at the end of the day, how much a Nigeria is earning that you want to increase the tax at the end of the day. The poor man is the one that is going to actually suffer at the end of the day. So we hope we get wiser with the incoming administration. I hope plans are on the way on how we can actually generate wealth and not keep spending our entire money, our entire revenue on paying, paying our debt at the end of the day, which we still have much more to pay. So I hope that we get wiser in issues like this.
Yeah, and to look at the palliative that we are receiving from the World Bank of $800 million, and we see that it's going to 50 million Nigeria. This is another added to our debt profile because we are expected to pay it in 25 years back to the World Bank. In as much as that type of loan, the percentage of return is very less because of this type. However, it doesn't change the fact that we keep adding to our debt profile and not into what will yield us revenue or interest or profit, but just to be able to aid our lifestyle. It shows that we are getting a lot of things very wrong, because there's no point that Nigeria is taking such huge amount of money in debt just to be able to reduce the hardship of citizens in the country. It means that we don't even have enough on our own to be able to reduce the hardship of 50 million Nigerians. We have to go and borrow externally to be able to do what we want to do. All of these things says we are not getting it right. And I'm looking forward to an administration that will start getting it right.
Of course.
Good morning.
Still on Daily Sun newspaper, we have
Hello, good morning,
here, election petition tribunal strike out case against Kalu. You can find that on page 6. Stop premeditated injustice against Igbo, coming from the Archbishop. Twist in Labour Party crisis as NLC storm Abuja Party Secretariat. You can find that on page 8. INEC hammer fall on wreck over Adamawa Guba result mess. Commission suspend him from Osprey returning officers' power. PDP supporters protest demand announcement of result. Downside of the paper, Usibanjo warned against ethnic and religious profiling in politics. We can find more of that on page 27. And that's all on Daily Sun newspaper.
On the Vanguard newspaper, cash crunch. E-payment transaction rise to 298%, 235 trillion naira in 3 months. NAFDAC gives regulatory approval to R21 malaria vaccine. Government probes biotech firm disposing toxic waste into River Benue. How Atiku Obi Kwankwaso helped Tinubu's victory. If you want to know why Fashola and how, you should find the details on page 9. Adamawa governorship poll crisis. INEC bar suspended REC to announce result Thursday. Stop this Adamawa show of shame, PDP governors tell INEC. PDP supporters protest, give INEC 72 hours to announce result. CSOs urge Buhari to intervene, says drama could hurt democracy. APC candidate Aisha asked court to hold Adamawa Guba poll. The details can be found on page 34. 2 aides killed, 3 policemen hospitalized as kidnappers abduct son in Rivers. Gridlock flight disruption as aviation unions begin 2-day warning strike. Still on the Labour Party crisis, NLC storms Labour Party National Secretariat, says we come to fumigate party office against rodents. The details can be found on page 34. Police arrest man for kidnapping, burying 3-year-old child alive in Katsina. Osibajo fumes over weaponization of ethnic, religious, and sectional prejudice. You can find the details on page 29. Allocate more resources to health, agriculture, Oxfam tax, incoming government. This is on health, and you can find the details on page 21. And for our sports column coming from Finidi, Ayumba won't relent in NPFL title chase. The details can be found on page 37. We have a picture story where we can see the protest in Yola, Adamawa State over Resident Electoral Commission announcement of APC's Aisha Binani Dahiru as governor of Adamawa State. And that's all the news on the Vanguard newspaper.
On the Blueprint newspaper, expert warned as federal government service debt with 96% revenue in 2022, blames fiscal authorities' lack of political will to take strong decisions. You can start the story on front page and read more inside the paper. For declaring Binani governor-elect, stay away from our premises, INEC told Adamawa Rec, directs administrative secretary to take charge. CDD urged sanction one electoral body to declare result. Above fault, INEC Oborik warned against coup possibility. Ari's action has element of treason coming from lawyers. You can find the story on page 6. And we have Fashoda still saying on the Blueprint, Atiku Obi Kwankwaso helped Tinubu's victory. You can find that story on page 5. E-Custom Project SAN caution AGF against disobeying court order. You can find that story inside the paper. Nigeria approved R21 malaria vaccine coming from the NAFDAC DG. And we have still coming from Ogun, 33-year-old mother nabbed for selling 18-month-old child at 6 million naira, which other people we saw 600,000, but for the Blueprint we have seen 6 million naira. So we want to know the exact figure, not to be having difference in different papers. You can find that story on page 15. JAM direct entry registration to commence on ED refill day. You can find that story on page 7. We are not fasting for lack of meals, say just in it. You can find that story on page 9. Bishop remanded for alleged rape of 2 church members. We find more of that story on page 9. And that's all on the Blueprint newspaper.
On this day newspaper, Buhari recounts achievements in oil gas sector, lists PIA as biggest accomplishments, discloses 200 billion naira, $7 million raked in from sale of marginal fields, says $2.8 billion AKK pipeline 43% completed. Aviation workers strike forces passengers to trek to airport. Unions block access roads. The details can be found on page 6. And on COVID-19, federal government effects 45.3 billion naira reimbursement to states and the FCT. You can find the details on page 5. NAFDAC approves clinical malaria vaccine for children. The big story, which is on most of our paper, INEC suspends Adamawa Reg as B96 judicial review of her announcement. You can find the details on page 10. We have a picture story for a better civil service, and if you want to know what the meeting is all about, grab This Day paper and find the details inside. And that's all the news on This Day newspaper.
All right, let's take a look at the world of business from Business Day newspaper. Nigerian textile imports doubled despite local production push. Hit 15-year high as industry languishes. You can find that story inside the paper, looking at how our textile industry is doing and how it can contribute to the growth of Nigeria. And we still have an explainer what to expect as CBN plan to mop up dormant unclaimed funds, which we saw in the papers yesterday, and also what's the way is forward for people to actually go and reactivate their account and also link it to their BVN. We have retirees quote 615.8 billion naira to insurance for life nudity. You can find that story on page 2. Controversy trail Fashoda's comment on Tinubu's dual citizenship. You can find more of that also inside the paper, and that's all on Business Day newspaper.
Now, world of sports on Sponge Sport Extra. Chelsea versus Real Madrid. Now or never. Blue face Los Blancos in win or bust battle. Napoli versus Milan. Osimhen on verge of UCL history as Italian giants face off in Naples. We have Spalletti banks on Magic Man for win. We have Mane for sale. You can find the details on page 8. Joshua in drugs test mix-up. Al Hilal versus AJ Nasir. Ronaldo Igalo clash in Saudi. Milan eye Boniface to replace Origi. Balogun not Arsenal standard. You can find the details on page 6. Chelsea hold talks with Nagelsmann. Jesus charged Gunners after slip-off. We have €1,000,000 man. Villarreal to Madrid. Pay €80 million, get Chukwueze. At the downside of the paper, Brentford scored Osayi Samuel, and you can find the details on page 3. Pep wants Gundogan Silva to stay. You can find the details on page 3. And that's all the news on Punch Sport Extra.
All right, let's take a look at the world of business again, looking at the national economy newspaper, where we have currency, buying, selling, inflation rate, comparison of 2022-2021, and some of the commodity prices we have. And the big story for the national economy says rising interest rate. Nigerian bank may consider cross-border expansion, and you have to check some of it. We have where we see 18% interest rate and all of that. So you read more on the front page and on page 4. Utilizing unclaimed funds in dormant accounts. What does that mean? You find out on page 15. How Nigeria can build farmers' resilience to disaster shocks. You can find that also on page 22. Silicon Valley Bank, why regulators must prioritize risk management, coming from the NDIC. You can find that on page 5 of the national economy. And that's all on national economy and also how far we can go on the program this morning. Thank you, Rachel, for doing this with me. Thank you to our crew members. Thank you to our producer. Thank you to our general manager, the ECHO executive, and everyone for your contribution to the success of this program. Until we come your way again, please do remain peaceful.